Shalom, I represent Brit-Am Hebrew Awareness. We work in order to bring together the elements, the peoples of Judah, that is the Jewish people, and the lost 10 tribes of Israel. What do we mean by to bring together? That each group knows who they are, recognizes who they are, believing in enhancing who they are and unifying themselves, but also working in synchronizing what they do, what they believe in, with each other. And the smaller section of these tribes of Israel, the tribes of Israel are divided into Judah and Israel, Israel representing the 10 tribes of Israel, also sometimes referred to as Joseph after the leading tribe, Joseph. And each one has their own separate task, their own separate proclivity that they should develop. We don't say that they should blur the identities of each within each other, but they should each do what they have to do and realize that they have a common destiny, a common goal to fulfill and common challenges to face. And we find that in our time. In our time, we find the world is aligning. There's a realignment of the peoples of the world, the whole realignment. The peoples of the world are facing off one against each other, and they're especially facing off towards Judah. Judah is now the Jewish people in the land of Israel, half of the Jewish people in the land of Israel, that is where they're giving expression to themselves, in the land of Israel, in the state of Israel. And at present they are fighting a war against Arabs and Muslims and numerous others. And this is a war of survival. We all tend to be somewhat complacent about it and take it for granted because the Almighty so far has been granting us victories and successes and very few losses, relatively speaking, even though every loss is a tragedy. Every loss to the Jewish people is a world in itself. And because we're a small country, a small people, relatively speaking, every loss is felt much more than it would be with others. But this is the reality we are faced with. This is what we have. Now, there are a few points worth noting before we get into more serious matters, not more serious, deeper matters or historical matters. We should note that at present we are faced off against the peoples of the world. Also, especially some of the most powerful nations of the earth are now beginning to challenge us, including China. China from the beginning has been encouraging the Arabs, encouraging Hamas, arming Hamas, and preparing Hamas for its role in China has been much more active than the world knows in building China up and also in building up Iran and in taking an antagonistic stance towards the Jewish people, towards Israel. And we've been talking about this from the very beginning. And recently it has come up even more than it had previously, especially with Pakistan, China drawing closer to Pakistan and Pakistan drawing closer to the Hamas, to the terrorist radicals. And recently, President Benjamin Netanyahu said that the present mission we have is to prevent a militant Islamic regime from meeting up with nuclear weapons or from nuclear weapons meeting up with a militant Islamic regime. Pakistan has nuclear weapons, said it for quite a while. It's quite an arsenal of nuclear weapons. It also has an air force whose pilots are quite proficient and they have quite a long history behind Netanyahu. Prime Minister Netanyahu continued the threat against us. The first is called Iran. The second is called Pakistan. Or more specifically, what we have to be aware of is the Taliban takeover of Pakistan. Because in the Pakistan borders on Afghanistan, and a good portion of Afghanistan merges with Pakistan. The northern section of Pakistan has populated by peoples originally refugees from Afghanistan who are affiliated with the Taliban, one of the worst terrorist groups the world has known, and we've known quite a few bad ones. Taliban is possibly worse than all of them. And he said, and recently Pakistan spoke of giving a nuclear umbrella to Saudi Arabia, that is to the Muslims in general, and they are also facing off against Israel. And Benjamin Netanyahu said that if these radical regimes have nuclear weapons, they will not obey the rules that have been obeyed in the last almost 7 decades. And they can threaten our world. So the first thing is to stop them from getting nuclear weapons. That's mission number 1. And mission number 2 is to find a substitute for oil. And he goes on. He did not threaten Pakistan, but he spoke of it. He spoke of Pakistan as a threat that we have to prepare ourselves against. And so too, we have the fact that recently the UK, Australia, and New Zealand recognise the Palestinian State. Perhaps they don't realise the significance of what they are doing, but the Arabs do realise it, because in effect you cannot have a Palestinian State in the land of Israel. Or you have a state of Israel, or you have a Palestinian State. You choose one, you negate the other. So all those who are in favour of Palestinian State, in effect, they are against the state of Israel. They themselves will not tolerate an adverse entity being established on their own borders. A hostile, vicious enemy being enabled to settle amongst them or alongside them. So that is a problem. And all those who recognise the state of Palestine, so-called state of Palestine, in effect are, in a de facto sense, supporting the destruction of the state of Israel, God forbid, or the endangering the state of Israel. So recently, the UK was amongst the states recognising Palestine, and this recognition was against the will of the majority of the citizens of the UK. Possibly 80%, the figures differ, but 80% or more of the citizens of the UK would not have supported such a move if they had been asked. And the British government itself was quite surprised with these results and tried to doctor them and to reduce their numbers, but they could not deny that the overwhelming majority of their own citizens were against this move, which is heartening, and possibly more heartening than anything else. Most of the British people are still in favour of the state of Israel. But there are exceptions. Ireland has been one of the most antagonistic elements against us. Ireland, and everyone likes the Irish. Everyone is sympathetic towards the Irish. We will have friends and even family in Ireland, and so we tend to forgive them. But they shouldn't be forgiven. In effect, they are nasty, and they are supporting nasty people, and they should be aware of it. Also, apart from that, Israel is alone. God willing, Israel will survive. Israel will defeat its enemies and face them down and last them out. But until that happens, they are a problem or potential problem. And this is also connected to the Gog and God, wars of Gog and Magog in the end times. In the end times, in the book of Ezekiel, Ezekiel speaks of the wars of Gog and Magog in the end times. And in these wars, these prophecies, an overall impression from these prophecies of Ezekiel, they said that in the end times, the last 10 tribes and Judah, the Jews, will unite, will come together. Now, what we are saying is not necessarily in the chronological order. What will become what will become first, when it cannot be certain. But that is what will happen. Eventually, Judah and the lost 10 tribes will come together, will reunite. And a portion of the lost 10 tribes will return to the land of Israel and receive their territories within the borders of the Middle East, the greater land of Israel, which will be divided up amongst the tribes. In addition to that, areas in Western Europe, according to the Hatem Sofer, great Jewish rabbi in the 1800s, but one of the greatest rabbis of recent times, the Hatem Sofer, and interpreting the Talmud, interpreting other sources, said that in the end times, those areas of Western Europe will be divided amongst the tribes of Israel. That is, in effect, confirming our interpretation of the sources as saying that the lost 10 tribes are amongst those nations. They're also in related areas in the North America, Australia, New Zealand, and so on. That is where the lost 10 tribes are. And they, too, will reform themselves, will return back to God Almighty, and eventually they will help Judah to fight its enemies. And enemies of Judah are the forces of Gog and Magog, representing most of the non-Israelite pagan peoples of the earth.